Shvua Tov. Chag Sameach. We are coming to you on Yom Yerushalayim from Chabad of Rechavia. Baruch Hashem. Last week, Baruch Hashem, we finished Rambam's Yesodei Torah. And so today, B'ezras Hashem, we start Sefer Hilchot Deot, which is the next in sequence in Sefer Hamada. Yeratzon melefenecha Adonai Eloheinu ve'avotenu shelo ya'ara davar takala al yadi velo ekashel b'davar halacha v'yismachu bi chaverai velo shelo omer tameh tahor velo tahor tameh velo al mutar asur velo asur mutar velo ikashelu chaverai b'davar halacha ve'esmach behem ki Adonai iten chokhmah piv dat v'shmona gal einai ve'abita nifleot mitoratecha. I have brand new glasses, so I think I will be able to see better once I get used to them, but right now I'm not quite there yet. Eliyahu's not with us today, which is too bad because this is his question. We finished our learning, first book of Mishna Torah, Yesodei Torah, and we left off with a very important question, which is, how far do we go? The final chapter of Yesodei Torah it demands of us that we actively engage in the world. It's not just that we ourselves have to act righteously, but we have to also prevent others from immoral or unrighteous behavior. Rambam brings a passage from the Gemara which seems kind of harsh, that from the Gemara in Chabad, that says that the good are going to be destroyed along with the wicked for the mere fact that they did not try to prevent the wicked from acting wickedly. So, and as we have acknowledged, as we've pointed out many times in our study of Rambam, the Torah is not a book of entitlements. It's not a bunch of stuff that we get or that we get to do. It's a bunch of obligations. It's what we are required to do, how we are obliged to live in this world. And so each of us, the rights of individuals by definition, and every individual's rights are by definition every other individual's obligations. So if each one of us sustains the rights of every other member of society, and every other member of society sustains my rights, I'm obligated to make a contribution and maybe even make sacrifices for the benefit of others, even if I don't feel like I'm going to derive a benefit from my contribution. But how far am I obligated to go? Is there a boundary? And in any situation, placing one's life on the line is the ultimate of, let's say, selflessness, right? Those who die in conflict, they're saying they paid the ultimate price, right? President Lincoln said, giving the last full measure of devotion, said famously in the Gettysburg Address. So what's required of us? Are we like soldiers in the army of God that we have to die at our posts? Do we follow like the Ashkenazim on Yom Kippur, read the martyrology, Rabbi Akiva and the other 9 Gedolim who were murdered by the Romans? Is that like what we're supposed to follow? We're supposed to set that as a standard for ourselves? And point out that in his letter on martyrdom, Rambam refuses to make a halachic case for requiring that we allow ourselves to be killed. And it's important to remember that Rambam lived in a time where he and his family were quite possibly forced at some point to convert to Islam just in order not to be killed themselves. I would just say, on a human level, and I think Rambam is very clear about this in his letter on martyrdom, it's not realistic for us to expect other people to sacrifice their lives, even for such a noble and powerful idea as Torah.
When you say other people, you mean other Jews?
Other Jews, but other people in general. I mean, he's writing to Jews. Yes, he's saying no, you should not. If they tell you convert or I'll kill you, convert. It's
No, but
because the conversion is an outward behavior, and he says in any event, what he says, I'm I'm very simplifying it, right?
Isn't it according to the Torah if you have to be killed if they tell you to convert or?
The big 3 are Avodah Zarah, Gilui Arayot, and Shvichat Damim, right? So if somebody says to you, worship avodah zarah, I'll kill you, or have improper sexual relations, or I'll kill you, or you go murder somebody else, or I'll kill you, then according to the Torah, we're supposed to allow ourselves to be killed and not to do one of those three. And who am I to insist, right? Please.
What are you not supposed to be killed?
Idol worship.
Idol worship.
Improper sexual relations, or murder.
Okay, thank you.
Right. But it's people don't necessarily. First of all, people don't have a clear understanding of a lot of halacha, right? I mean, it's something as simple as separation between meat and dairy. People don't have an understanding of how that operates at a very basic level, right? I mean, my Rav told me that he had people yelling at him when he was walking around in Machane Yehuda with a basket where he had a piece of meat and cheese, together in the basket, right? He bought meat at the butcher, he went next door and he bought cheese, and people said, you shouldn't keep it in the same basket. I mean, okay. So Rambam in his letter to the communities that were under that kind of pressure, he said, it's not a mitzvah to allow yourself to be killed, especially for something that doesn't rise in the way he interpreted it, doesn't rise to the level of what the Torah requires of us.
I had people tell me that it says in the Torah you shouldn't have meat and milk. So why can't you have chicken with milk? Or why can't you have turkey with milk?
That's a three-way machloket in the Gemara, and it's a very serious question. And in the Gemara, in the times of the Gemara, the Rabbi Yosef Galili paskin that chicken was not meat. And so in the times of the Gemara, there's a whole sugya in the Gemara about you know what I'm talking about, right? Right. The whole sugya in the Gemara where they said, but I went to this place and they gave me chicken parmesan. And the other Rav says, oh, so you were a guest in Rabbi Yossi ben Galili, right? Or Yossi HaGalili, right? Because chicken is not it says, Lo tibashel gidi b'chalev imo, don't cook a kid in the milk of its own mother. Chickens don't give milk.
Nowadays in Tel Aviv they say cheeseburger kosher.
Well, because
the cheese is not cheese.
Yeah, but if you have
because the cheese is not dairy, or now they're going to make meat that's not from an animal.
But there is a problem of Marathaim. I ate it. It wasn't good.
It may or may not be a problem. I'm not going to pass on it, not seeing the situation.
The cheese was not made
anyway,
with soy.
It's not reasonable to expect other people to take extreme measures, even, no matter how much we might say, oh, this is like a great Torah value.
Yeah,
and it's not reasonable to place unreasonable expectations on ourselves. And I would say with, kind of bearing in mind the questions that were left open from last time, I think it's a good starting point to delve into Hilchot De'ot.
But so the question is if someone in my opinion, if someone tells you to either convert from Judaism and then, or you'll be killed, I think it's a Kiddush Hashem to die for that, because then
Rambam disagrees.
Because then you're if you convert, then you're not considered Jewish anymore. Then
okay, it's not. We can't. No, excuse me. Time out. Okay, we can't even begin to address this question from Rambam's perspective without spending probably 2 months learning his letter. Igeret Hashmad. Seriously. Okay. So this is not for now. It's mamish not for now. Right?
So what does the person do?
It's not for now. Shavua tov. What's the matter? The simple answer, according to Rambam, is you convert, because their religion is not a real religion anyway, and you're not becoming Jewish anyway. And what we're going to do? Have God forbid, every Jew in Spain is going to be killed because the Muslims took over, So Rambam. So we're now B'ezras Hashem beginning our learning of Hilchot De'ot, and I think today we'll do probably just the first paragraph because there's a lot of kind of introduction that I want to go over. The word de'ot in modern Hebrew, as you know, means opinions, right, or points of view. But in Rambam's use, the word has a much broader sense, kind of qualities, attributes, and the qualities that are referred to are those which make up a human being. And note that, the whole first volume, if you will, of Mishna Torah, which comprises several books, goes under the name Sefer Hamada. which is the book of knowledge, or I think in modern terminology we would probably better use it in the modern use of the word Mada, and call it the book of science, because it's really a book that shows that the notion that there is some kind of a conflict or that science and faith don't belong together, that's a false notion. And it's a notion that's caused a lot of unnecessary confusion and led a lot of people astray, and it's given rise to a lot of hostility and stupidity on both sides of the supposed argument, because it's not an argument. Okay? So, and I would say it's not by chance that in the book that's called Sefer Hamada, the book of knowledge, if you will, the section that introduces us to now the fundamental nature of what a human being is all about is also titled using the same word, dat, Hilchot de'ot, right? And we should also notice that that knowledge is itself the focus of Rambam's whole project, right? Mishna Torah opens with the word leda, that the most important thing, the foundation of all knowledge is leda, to find out or to get to know or to come to understand that there is a first creator, a first cause in the universe. And the whole Mishna Torah ends at the very end with the definitive form of the verb to know, coming from the book of Isaiah, and the world will be full of the knowledge of God as the sea fills the bed of the ocean. And I would say that this juxtaposition communicates a core principle of Rambam's whole project, that we have to reconcile our understanding of the world, if you will, with Torah. We have to allow our mind the freedom to inquire and to doubt and to be open intellectually to change. Because only once the mind is completely free to engage with the world can the mind truly grasp Torah. Remember that remember Rambam's whole goal here is knowledge of God, and knowledge is an individual experience, right? So we don't get knowledge of God by sitting in a shir and memorizing long sections of Gemara. It's a very praiseworthy thing to do, right? But we should not think that that is the whole objective of learning Torah. Okay, so now Rambam turns to knowledge of the human being. Remember, in the first chapters of Yesodei Torah, Rambam talks about the hierarchy of creation, if you will, right? And the simple message that we took from that is that for us, what does that mean? For us, our job is to identify our place in that great chain of being. And once we identify our place, we then must learn all that is required of us in our place. And then once we've learned that, then we have to actually devote our energies and ourselves to executing. We have to do our job. Each one of us has a unique task that God put us in this world for. And this is the whole problem of Tanakh and of all of human history. It's all Cain and Abel, right? Everybody wants something other than what they are. Everybody wants to be different from who they are and wants to do something other than what they do. They look at somebody else and they say, oh, I want his job. Okay? Instead of saying, Gewalt, they do their job, I better do my job. Or, or as Rabbi Shlomo said, Cain and Abel, right? So Abel took his offering and God accepted it. And Cain, he could have said, wow, my own brother. And God accepted his offering. And instead he said, you what? Boom. So,
Mimesis.
So a good introduction for our study of the second book of Mishna Torah, of Hilchot de'ot, comes from the Guide for the Perplexed, and that's what we're going to start with today, B'ezras Hashem. And again, as every time I mention the guide, there are questions about what was the purpose of the guide, why should we study it, what did Rambam try to accomplish with it. The guide was written as an extensive letter to an advanced student, somebody with whom Rambam communicated. This was a rabbi who was also a medical doctor at the time, living in Spain. He had studied philosophy and science, and he was having his own questions and trouble kind of reconciling. So it's really, in a sense, it's a personal teaching. It's a one-on-one encounter between a great teacher and a valued pupil. And it has much to teach us, but Rambam himself acknowledged that it's not for everybody. And in the introduction to the guide, he said, I think I've done a lot of really good stuff in this book. You may not like it. If it's not for you, set it aside. Don't bother. Don't trouble yourself. Don't bother to read it.
For whom does he not think it's appropriate?
I'm not sure that it's, I think he leaves it up to the reader, right? So the guide is, in his commentary on the Mishnah, Rambam kind of took apart and then put back together the whole legalistic process. And in Mishna Torah, he laid out a proper way of behavior for individuals, communities, and nation, and the Jewish nation, in keeping with halacha. The guide, he himself says, is the science of the law in the true sense. And in order to attain the truth of the science of Torah, he says we have to engage in speculation, in theory. And the parable that he gives is, he says the Torah is like a palace. And this is what it's like as we get close to God. In order to get close to God, he says we have to use all of our faculties. Now remember, in Sefer Torah, he talked about prophecy. And he said in order to attain the level of prophecy, a person needs to be perfected in intellectual, emotional, and imaginative faculties. And those three faculties, each person has, we all have them. So it's not, those faculties themselves are not unique to prophets. What's unique to prophet is a level of, let's use the term excellence, which is a quasi-philosophical term that, is used sometimes in like the Aristotelian sense, so to speak, of like, I've developed this to the fullest of my capacity, right? But each one of us has all these three capacities. And so Rambam is saying that we also must work and train ourselves as though we were prophets in order to actually accomplish the full human potential of coming close to God, which again, he describes as like entering a palace. We're in a city, we're on the outskirts of the city, we come into the city, we're on the outskirts of the neighborhood, and then we walk through the neighborhood, and at the heart of the neighborhood we see the palace, and then we can enter the outer court and the inner rooms, and then finally we come to that chamber at the very heart of the palace. It's very much obviously like what? Like the Beit HaMikdash, right? But Rambam says, he's very, very explicit about this. He says, if you have studied the law, studied Torah, and you have correct opinions, because you have studied and really internalized the lessons of written Torah and of Chazal, of the oral Torah, he says that's great. That is not sufficient to get into the palace. In order to get into the palace, you need theory and speculation. You need theory and speculation. In fact, he says we need it not just to get into the palace, even to perceive the palace in the first place, even to find the palace. We need the tools of science and philosophy. It's not sufficient to hold correct opinions. This is very important, right? This is his whole project, if you will, with respect to our relationship to the mitzvot. It's not sufficient to have correct opinions because we memorize them all. We need to understand them, have internalized them, be able to express them clearly, and to explain them. So, according to Rambam, there is basically two things in Judaism that we can have 100% certainty about. It is the existence of God and that the fact that God is not in any way material. And Rambam says these two notions arise, they are what's embodied in the first two mitzvot, the first two Ten Commandments of the Ten Commandments, right?
Is he talking about Jew and non-Jew here? Does he bring up the materiality of the quality? No. I mean, he doesn't write, the guide is not written about like, you the Jews, I'm not the Jews. I mean, there are certain things which in Rambam's view are universal, and one thing that is universal truth from Rambam's perspective is that there is a God, and that the God is not material, right? So, if a non-Jew wants to read the guide and get the truth out of the guide, or the truth from Rambam's perspective, how do I say Meshubach? Please, go ahead. Rambam says explicitly, and we've seen it, right? Non-Jews can have prophecy, can have, and not just kind of this bizarro prophecy like Bilam, but they can have true prophecy, and they can also get Olam Haba, right? It's just that we kind of have an edge on these things because we were given the Torah. But non-Jews can also embrace the Torah. Look at Rabbi Akiva. His parents were converts, and he became, he became all of Torah Shabbat Pei comes from him. Yes, please.
Why do non-Jews have prophecy?
Why?
Yeah. I'm just curious.
I have no idea.
Okay.
I can, I'm having a hard time figuring out why Jews have prophecy.
Why
but,
not? Why not?
I mean, no, the whole notion, yeah, why not?
Okay.
Indeed.
I was just
Indeed.
curious, why does anybody have prophecy?
I would say why, okay, so from Rambam's perspective, I'm sorry, from Rambam's perspective, prophecy is it's available to human beings. We need prophecy as a phenomenon because the whole Torah comes to us as a result of the prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu, whose prophecy is unique. Never been a prophet like him before or since, right? And in fact, I'm gonna talk about that. It's right here. But sorry.
The last lesson we had months ago was prophecy is available to everybody, but only if God wants it.
Well, so that's yes, and that was thank you. But that's what Rambam says in the guide. In fact, that the difference between what he calls the philosophers, which let's say it's the world or non-Jewish view of philosophy, even assuming the non-Jews who believe in a God or even believe in the right God, but they haven't accepted the Torah. Okay, so according to non-Jews who believe in God and believe in prophecy, according to them, prophecy comes to people who have attained the level of, as Rambam describes, they've perfected themselves intellectually, emotionally, and imaginatively. Rambam says the piece that's missing and the difference in the Torah, as you said, very good, you were paying attention, I'm impressed, thank you, is that, at a certain point, God says, you know what, you did all the work, but I'm not giving you prophecy. And the example that he brings is Yirmiyahu and his amanuensis. Where are we? No, wrong chapter. Baruch ben Neriah. He says, the fact that one who prepares is sometimes prevented from becoming a prophet. You may know from the history of Baruch ben Neriah, for he followed Jeremiah, who trained, taught, and prepared him. And he set himself the goal of becoming a prophet, but he was prevented. And he says, I am weary with my groaning, and I find no rest. And thereupon he was told by Jeremiah, thus shalt thou say to him, thus saith the Lord, and so on. Thou seekest great things for thyself, seek them not. So sometimes God says, you did all the work, but just, I'm not, you're not the one. And by the way, this is a theme that we see very clearly in Chumash, especially, we see it very, very clearly in Sefer Bereshit. It goes back to what I said a moment ago, right? This is, if you will, Cain and Abel, right? Cain had this great idea. I'm going to give an offering to God to show God my gratitude. And Cain gives the offering to God, and Abel looks at what his brother's doing and says, oh, that's a good idea, I'll do it too. And he does it. And for whatever reason, God accepts Cain's offering and Abel's offering, and God looks at Cain and says, back to the drawing board. You need more work, right? And we don't know why. And that happens over and over and over and over again. We see in the family of Abraham. What's the story of Hagar and Ishmael? They go out into the wilderness, right? And she says, oh, I'm going to die. And she throws her child, who at the time the story is taking place, he's probably 16 years old, but never mind, right? She throws him under a bush. They're going to die of thirst, right? Hagar and Ishmael, they understand that one of the key elements of the Abraham narrative is that parent and child are going to go off to a desolate place together. And they are both going to conspire together willingly that the parent will see that the child dies. And they think that it's them. And the angel comes along and says to Hagar, no. See, look, turn around. Look, there's the water right there. All right? No, it's not you. Okay? Abraham's brother, at the end of Chayei Sarah, has 2 wives and 2 concubines, and they have 12 children. Because he knows that somewhere in the Abraham narrative there's going to be this thing about one of Abraham's close family who's going to have 2 wives and 2 concubines and 12 children, and he thinks it's him. And it's not him. Very nice, he has a nice life, but it's not him, it's Yaakov. Okay, so there are these things that happen over and over again, and
we all wanted, we're all very caught up in trying to get something somebody else has to do something that somebody else is doing. That's where all the conflict comes, all throughout Tanakh and all throughout human life, all throughout human existence, right? We want Jerusalem, they want Jerusalem. We want Harabait, they want Harabait. I'm not going to get too much into the politics of it, but in 1967, what a stupid decision. We kept the West Bank and we gave away Harabait. Whose idea was this? Right? Okay, anyway.
Did Rambam consider himself to be a prophet?
I think Rambam, it's a very important question. I think Rambam definitely was consciously in training for prophecy, and whether or not he was personally disappointed that I don't know whether he ever experienced it, right? Because one of the things about people who are truly connect is unless there's a real reason for them to reveal themselves, they don't do it. It's like when somebody announces to you that he's a Mikubal, he's not a Mikubal. When somebody announces to you that he's a prophet, he's not a prophet, right? Unless the moment requires it, right? And so I don't know what Rambam's personal experience was, but I'm convinced that Rambam put himself as much as he knew how through the course of training to be a prophet, yeah. And whether or not he ever attended in his lifetime, I can't say, but we're the beneficiary of a lifelong dedication on his part, and I think it was I can't criticize Rambam for interposing his personality between Torah and us, if you will, because I haven't found any points to be able to do that. I'm not enough of a scholar to be able to take that position. I would say that we are the beneficiaries of Rambam's fearless pursuit of truth, and which is why learning Rambam is just such an amazing experience, because here's a man who was not afraid of the truth. If anything, he was afraid of maybe not finding out the truth. And at the same time, he was totally committed to Torah. And it's a Musar Haskell. It's just such an incredible standard for us to hold ourselves to try to live up to. That instead of saying, well, this part of my brain is stupid or is worthless, or that part of my brain is idiotic. Rambam says, we're complex. We are convoluted beings. We're mokav. We're made up of a lot of different things, and that's exactly the transition that I'm making now from Yisodei HaTorah to Hilchot Deot, which Bezrat Hashem we'll get to before too long. But I just want to get a little bit more into talking about the guide, because I think it's very important to where we're going now. So Rambam says basically there are two things that we can have 100% certainty about. There is a God, and God is in no way material. And there's nothing that pertains to material reality that can in any way be used to describe God. And those are the first two commandments, right? I am God and no other gods. And everything else, everything is subject to interpretation and to speculation, and particularly to doubt and to questioning. And again, as we've quoted Rabbi Nachman, right? It's not an issue of whether or not we question or doubt even the words of Chazal. That's not usher. But we don't change the halacha, right? Because Chazal in their wisdom, they also had doubts and questions. You go back and look in the Gemara, right? This is not like metaphorical. In the Gemara there are in the Gemara there are serious debates among the Amoraim as to what is the shape and nature of God's physical body. And this is not some metaphor. There were disputes, and they were in mainstream rabbinic thought into the early Middle Ages, certainly like in France. There were rabbis who contemplated what does God's physical body look like? And if you want to get cute with it, you're going to say, well, God can't have a physical form. What do you mean there's something God can't do? So we get ourselves all tied up in this, okay? All I'm saying is, but to the extent, there's a famous discussion in the Gemara in Brachot of what does it say, and we know what it says in the Parshiot inside of our tefillin. What does it say inside the Parshiot of God's tefillin? Right? And how does that come about?
It's not just like some random speculation. We have a pasuk. What does God say to Moshe? You can't see my face. You'll see my back.
Yeah, exactly.
And so in the Amorim, you'll see my back. So when he saw his back, he must have seen the knot at in the tefillin on the back of God's head. I wonder what it said in the Parshiot. I know what it says in the Parshiot of my tefillin. What does it say in God's tefillin? It comes right from the pasuk. This is not some, a bunch of cannibals sitting off, sitting naked around a campfire and smoking dope. These are legitimate questions that some of the greatest Jewish thinkers, some of the most spiritual and wisest and most intellectually honest people in all of human history asked themselves seriously, because they were struggling to try to understand the nature of God and what it is that God demands of us. Okay? So all I'm saying is, speculation is great, and we should not be afraid of it, and that's what Rambam is telling us. So Rambam, in the guide, whereas in the Mishnayot, in his commentary on the Mishnah, he took on, if you will, the Gaonim. He said, don't think for a minute that this is all like, that there's only one way to interpret this. And let me show you how these things fit together. By the way, before Rambam, they didn't learn the Mishnayot as a separate teaching, right? The Mishnayot were brought in the academies of the Gaonim as like the jumping off place for studying Gemara. Right? And Gemara was used to tell you how everybody else didn't understand the Torah, and there's only one way to apply the halacha. And Rambam said, if there's only one way to apply the halacha, then what are all these rabbis doing? Right? So it doesn't make sense. Again, as we've said before, right? He understood the process the same way that the Gaonim understood it, but he came to the opposite conclusion. The Gaonim understood that from Sinai, Torah proliferated, and people started teaching and learning with each other, and people started coming up with different interpretations or different ideas or different understandings. And the Gaonim said they came up with all these different understandings and they're all wrong. And Rambam said they came up with all these different understandings and they're all valid. And otherwise, why in the Gemara, we quoted just a minute ago, the famous three-way machloket about what is chicken. Is it parv, or is it meat midorabanan, or is it meat midoraita? Is it from the Torah? And at the time we have Yossi HaGalili, who paskined that chicken was parv. And in the Gemara we talk about I went to Yossi HaGalili's house and I had chicken parmesan. And the other rabbis say, oh yeah, that's right, because you were in his house. They don't say, he ate what? Treif? Right? They don't put him in cherem. Okay? Rambam, in the guide, presents a theory of human knowledge. Those of you who've learned Sefer Tanya, this is going to sound familiar. Rambam says, human knowledge, it's like a lightning flash. You get this flash of brilliance. You understand everything, and then it goes dark.
Yeah, but what I enjoyed very much in the Gemara learning is not only have to all these opinions, but you have to prove it with the Torah.
Yeah.
And then what is amazing, the same proof of three rabbis may be all in the same pasuk, but a different word.
Yeah.
They say, that's my proof for my, that's genius. I say, that's
it's amazing. I'm not aware of, I'm sure there are other amazing works of spiritual, intellectual achievement, but I'm not aware of anything that comes anywhere near the level of that complexity and that intellectual honesty at the same time that goes on in the Gemara. And it's an amazing gift. Yeah. So Rambam's theory of human knowledge is like we get this flash of insight, like the flash of lightning, and then it goes dark, right? So it's not like if you remember reading Plato's The Republic with the parable of the cave, and you can just see the shadows on the wall, right? And then the prisoner is released and comes out and at first is dazzled by the sunlight, and then his eyes become used to it, and then you can look directly at the sun. In Rambam's world, you can't look directly at the sun. All you can get is like these little flashes, and then they go away, right? So the guide is intended for a religious person who wants to be able to live with this kind of this process, which creates uncertainty, okay? Which is, I guess we call it cognitive dissonance, right? And remember, he's writing in a time and in a place, in a world which, unfortunately, or for whatever it's worth, it's not so different today. He's writing in a time and place where the religious establishment, by and large, tells you, no, that stuff is nonsense. No, don't pay any attention to your own intellect.
Don't pay any attention to the evidence of your own senses. Don't pay any attention to what those scholarly people are writing, those scientists are saying. Don't pay any attention to that. You just sit here and memorize this page, and then, you know, what the time that I tell you to stand up, you stand up. The time I tell you to sit down, and you'll be fine. Please.
But the flashes of information or knowledge are the essence of religious imagination, so they never go away.
They never go away, but remember what
That's why we have Bina to help us.
No, okay, but remember what he was saying in terms of talking about the prophetic process, right? That the people who rise to the level of being capable of being prophets, it's exactly that. That they have, I would say, clarified their own emotional processes to the extent that their personality and their emotions no longer stand in the way of continual clear receipt of that information. So when they get an insight, it stays. It's like they turn on the TV and it stays on, right? And as opposed to like you turn on, damn, I can't get reception. It's like, you know, I got the side with the picture, now where to go, right? So most of us are like doing this, right? And the prophet is somebody who has a clear signal, but it's very rare. So the information is always there, perhaps, right? And Rambam, I said, if you know, those of you who study Sefer Tanya, this will sound familiar, that kind of flash, what the Rabbi calls chokhmah, right? The flash of insight, right? I'm not sure that Rambam goes on to the rest of it, to the, you know, to the Bina and Dat part of it. Right now we're just talking about his, there is a body of scholarship, and I think it makes a lot of sense, that says that one, you know, like Rambam doesn't really tell us what the guide is, right? And it's one of the distinguishing characteristics of some of the really great works of philosophic religious literature. Like Bala Tanya doesn't really tell us what the Tanya is. He tells us, yeah, I can't have yichidus with you, but there's in every community there are guys who've had yichidus with me, and they'll learn the book with you and they'll explain it to you, right? But Tanya it's an incredibly complex work. It is a work of practical Kabbalah. It is a work of basic, you know, textbook of Chassidus. It's an emotional, psychological self-help book.
Psychological.
It is a book on how to deal with depression. It's a book on how to create and maintain a stable society in the face of the pressure that we feel when we are the underdog, and that the Goyim can come and kill us at any time they want to. It's a political tract. It's an amazing book. And he doesn't list that at the beginning, right? Similarly, Rambam, you know, I would say that if I had to pin like one quick, you know, descriptor on the guide, it's the guide for the perplexed. It doesn't mean that after you finish reading it, you're not still perplexed, right? It's a kind of an exposition of a theory of knowledge. And the theory of knowledge consistent, I would say, with his understanding of an influence from Aristotle by way of the Muslim world, the Muslim philosophers, is that knowledge is a there's a personal aspect to it. Each of our knowledge is unique. And what, you know, to go back to Plato, to go back to Socrates, right? Knowledge is not really what we think of as knowledge. We define knowledge as like something, oh, I know. Like what are the things that I know? I know that if I drop this, it's going to fall. I don't need science to prove that. I don't need religion to explain it. It's the way the world works, okay? Pretty much everything else is kind of open to question, open to doubt. And so the whole, like, Socrates' whole project was not about finding out the truth. It was more about trying to, as somebody said, is a great expression, trying to define the contours of our own ignorance. And that's kind of, I think, what Rambam is getting at in the guide. He's saying that we will have proper opinions, if you will, and proper behaviors from learning halakha. We shouldn't think that that is also all we need to do in order to fulfill ourselves or to achieve our own full potential as human beings, because our full potential as human beings also comprises an intellectual aspect. And if God didn't want us to use that intellectual aspect, God wouldn't have given us the intellectual aspect, kind of simplistically. Okay? So Rambam's theory of knowledge he says, even those who get the flash can't always explain it. So the guide is intended for a religious person who wants to learn to live with what we call this cognitive dissonance. The fact that I have understandings of the world, I have intellectual understandings of the world. Sometimes they seem to clash with something that I just learned in my Gemara share. Sometimes they seem to clash. We mentioned the other day about, all the people who say, well, the dietary laws made sense then, but now we have pasteurization and refrigeration and antibiotics, so we don't need to worry about that stuff.
Baby
right?
formula.
Baby formula, right? So now we don't need to worry about all that stuff, right? So on one level, I might be convinced by that, right? If I just look at it on a not really intellectual in the true sense of the word, but if I look at it from a level of argument, it's like, oh yeah, if I eat unpasteurized milk together with meat that's been lying around out, not refrigerated for days, I'll probably get sick. But now I have pasteurization, I have refrigerators. Oh, so maybe you're right. Maybe we don't need to do that. So I have to look beyond that, right? But I can't just reject that question, because now I'm saying to my mind, I don't want you to operate. And Rambam is saying this, be fully human. Allow the mind to operate. Explore. Examine, understand, because if we don't understand, we'll never get into the palace.
How come that certain laws are not changeable and some others are yes changeable?
There are very, very bekitzur, there are halachic processes for that. I mean, kind of basically, I would say that like one kind of very simple principle is there's a principle that when Chazal have established a law, we don't change it, even if we can say today, quote unquote, the reason for the law no longer applies. Like second day of Yom Tov, right? But so one of the things.
Yeah, but that's only assuming that the kashrut laws are strictly an external requirement for obeying the halakha of Torah. A deeper understanding of kashrut is that there's spiritual, moral, and ethical guidance, which has a much far-ranging implication and effect upon the Jewish community.
Yeah.
Monogamic.
But okay, so okay, two quick things. And like a fundamental principle is that the rabbis decided that under certain circumstances they can change a halacha, when at the time that the halacha was formulated, Chazal said, because of this set of circumstances, then we're going to create this halacha. And when that set of circumstances no longer prevails in the world, that in some cases permits later generations of rabbis to say, okay, now that set of circumstances no longer applies, we're going to undo that halachic requirement.
There's Haredim Rabbonim, two wives.
God bless them.
The wife.
So I don't know if Maimonides is talking in this sense. As I understand Tanya, knowledge is when it's a process through Chachrodin Adat, when the intellect is capable of communicating with the heart. And then it becomes knowledge. One without the other.
Right, so I think Rambam has a different definition of, an overall definition of knowledge. He's talking, I would say that he's talking about knowledge more in a kind of Platonic Aristotelian sense.
Say that again?
I think Rambam is talking about the concept of knowledge. When we talk about knowledge in a philosophical sense in just a moment, I think Rambam is talking about knowledge more in the context of like the Platonic and Aristotelian influence on Islamic thought at his time. Okay.
On Islamic thought?
On Islamic thought, which then became, that was like, that's where all of this stuff came into Jewish discourse, came through Arabic translations. Rambam didn't know Greek and he never saw Aristotle in Greek. He read some translated works and a lot of commentary on Aristotle that had been written in Arabic, right? So Rambam says in the guide, my purpose is that the truth be glimpsed and then concealed. So he wants to actually reveal to us the wisdom and knowledge he has to impart. He wants to reveal it to us in the way that he's telling us the human mind works, which is kind of fascinating, right? Okay. There's a lot of other stuff here to say about this. Yes, so true to his understanding of the nature of existence. Okay. So there's I found a great lecture online by this Professor Kenneth Seeskin, who's a Rambam scholar from Northwestern University, and he says the guide is about how to understand and deal with the limits of human knowledge, how to accept the limits imposed by the impossibility of complete understanding, and still remain passionately committed and faithful to the Torah. And I would also say it's to define the notion of knowledge. So, what you were saying is, I think Rambam is also, in the guide, he is defining knowledge. And really, in a sense, we can say that certainly our modern Western understanding of the concept of knowledge comes to us largely from the Greeks.
Comes what?
Comes to us largely from the Greeks.
Oh.
And understand, like Rambam is, he's totally committed to Torah and will never question. At the same time, he says that pretty much everything that we are taught and that we read in the Torah is itself not clear. He himself, who is very strong on the notion of God, the Creator, basically says we can't prove that. Rambam sort of saying, we praise the God who chose to create the world, and so Rambam is kind of saying, well, in my writings here, I'm going to tip the scales in favor of the notion of creation, but I can't prove that it's true any more than you can prove that it's not true.
Well, how could the finite ever prove the infinite?
Right. Well, but again, this is a very important challenge to many of, I'd say, really to his whole society at the time that he was writing, which drew a very clear line of demarcation between what they called science or philosophy and what they called religion. And if you were a religious person, you didn't ask a question, you just accepted, you didn't read their books. And if you were a philosopher, you just threw packets of mud at the guys on the other side of the wall, right? And Rambam is saying, can't we all get along? What's the matter with you people? Rambam is saying, you guys have the truth and you guys have the truth. And the truth is this messy stuff. And and by avoiding the messiness of the truth, we're actually not getting the truth. Right? And it's that simple. But he says creation, we have to understand. We accept it. Torah says that that's what happened, so we accept it. We have no idea what it really means. Creation is not susceptible to scientific study, right? Because we can't do a control experiment. We can't do another creation and watch how it works.
That's religious imagination.
Similarly, right, and similarly, the prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu. We can test, and we saw in the final chapter of the Torah, how we test prophets, right? A prophet says, so-and-so is going to happen, and it happens. Great. Says it again and it happens, great. As long as what he keeps on saying keeps coming true, then we know that he's a prophet. And the minute he says 10 things are going to happen and 8 or 9 of them happen and 1 or 2 of them don't, we know he's a false prophet. As you say, right? Thank you. Right? So, but we can't do that with the prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu. It's a once in cosmic history occurrence. And so there are things that we just accept, if you will, on faith. We accept it was unique. We cannot, so there are limits to what we can intellectually kind of drag over the fence from the Torah side, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't keep on trying to do that.
The limit is only the halakha.
I'm sorry?
The limit is only halakha.
Well, the limit is the halakha to the extent that Rambam wants us to do our best to understand the halakha.
Mm-hmm.
But even when we can't understand it, doesn't mean that we shouldn't keep it. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Were there any prophets before Moshe Rabbeinu?
Before Moshe were there prophets.
Were there any prophets before Moshe?
Abraham, yeah.
There were. I'm not sure that Let's say yes, Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, perhaps.
Sarah.
And Sarah.
There are people that God spoke with that had direct conversations with God, but they didn't. Abraham didn't say, "All right, next Wednesday, you're gonna get pulled over for speeding," right? So I want to try to finish this. Yeah.
You're using the term accept on faith, and I have a big problem with that. I'm learning Ashla Kabbalah now outside of this room, and they use the concept of that when your reason it only takes you so far, then your Emunah can take you farther. And that, to me, that's a much more proactive stance than accepting on faith.
Okay, I'm not sure.
See the difference?
I'm not. Yeah, I do see a difference. I'm not sure that I buy that, and I'm not sure at all that Rambam would agree with that statement, because the kind of overwhelming body of Rambam scholarship, basically, they kind of agree that he was not a mystic and that he was maybe an anti-mystic, and that faith takes you farther. I don't know what that means, and I don't want to get into it now. I'm sure that there's a lot to talk about it. But what Rambam is trying to do is he's saying, you know, he was trying to bring the whole human being together. Okay, and faith is. I'm not sure. When you talk about emunah, I'm also not sure what that word means, and that's a long conversation, right? Rambam says we have revelation, so we know that there is a God. We know that we don't know anything about this God, and we know that this revelation comes from God, and we're living our lives and trying to do the best that we can to live consistently with that revelation. We also have this great mind, this great gift, and we're trying to understand the world through our intellect. And what's the nature of knowledge? And is there really some kind of a conflict between knowledge and revelation? No, they're complementary. Let's see how that works, because in the limits of our knowledge, we have Chazal to fall back on in terms of behavior. And I don't know about emunah and Kabbalistic notions of achieving higher status, and I think that's very much not part of Rambam's project, certainly not at this point. So let me just finish this up.
Thank you for making that clear.
No, thank you. So,
Maybe it's a question of where faith kicks
so,
in the intellectual
I
down here, up here. Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that Rambam at this point, I'm going to say something different, okay?
How did Avram handle it with Yitzchak? Was that a hung-up?
I have no idea.
At some point, or just not?
Not for now. No idea. Totally not for now. Rambam, we're talking about the notion of faith. Okay. Rambam says, in the guide, he says, if we accept correct opinion on the basis of received traditions, we're never going to get into the palace. And the purpose of human existence is to get into the palace, that knowledge of God. So he says, just by following the halacha and having faith is not enough. He says, if you stay your progress because of a dubious point, if something comes up that doesn't make sense, if you do not deceive yourself into believing that there is proof with regard to matters that have not been proven, if you do not hasten to reject and pronounce as false any assertion whose contradictions have not yet been proven, and finally, if you do not aspire to apprehend things that you are not able to apprehend, you will achieve human perfection and attain the rank of Rabbi Akiva. So he's saying we have to be intellectually honest. Our intellect can only take us so far. And so we have revelation in terms of guides to behavior, right? However, he says do not, on the other hand, and remember Rabbi Akiva, because he understood, let's say you use like the Socratic term, he understood the contours of his own ignorance. He understood that he's just one man in the world and trying to interact with God. And you remember the four who went into the Pardes, into the orchard, one died, one committed suicide, one went mad, and Rabbi Akiva came out and said, that was pretty interesting. Okay, so Rambam is saying if we are fearlessly and consistently intellectually honest, that door is open to us. Do not, however, he says, take the shortcut of faith. He says, as attractive as it is, simple faith is not for those who want to also apply the human gift of the intellect. God made us with our limitations. Right? What's the bracha that we make? We eat something. What do we? God created all these living things and all of their needs, all of their lacks. Right? And so in order for us to be given the gift of food, we have to need the food. And so we're acknowledging that God made us missing something. Right? And so that Rambam says that's us. We're made with deficiencies. We are not. We don't all see the world the same way. Each of us sees the world a different way, which is why he said there can be legitimate prophets who all receive the same prophetic message, and yet they all give it over differently because of their own unique blend of personality and intellect
and imaginative faculty and so on and so forth. So the bottom line, he says, when we finally achieve this full emotional and intellectual openness, and we work to constantly, we never get there, but we work consistently to harmonize that with our acceptance of the halacha. When this happens, the souls will find rest, the eyes will be delighted, and the bodies will be eased of their toil and of their labor. Bottom line, God is not interested in dogma. Unlike other religions, Judaism does not provide a clear-cut answer to every question. I'm sorry, we can't make a leap of faith because it's not available. It doesn't exist for us. We have to do the work, B'ezras Hashem, to the fullest extent of our capacity. So I'm just going to start on chapter 40 of book 2 of the Guide to Perplexed. He says, it's been explained that man is political by nature. Political doesn't mean that we're out there carrying signs. It means that we are part of a society and that we function as a part of society. This is straight, by the way, from Greek thought. This is completely from the Greeks, okay? That a human being is a human being by virtue of being part of a group of human beings. When I say man is a political animal, which I think was Aristotle, that's exactly what he's talking about. He's saying that to be fully human, our full humanity only is attainable in the context of being a part of society. Because of the manifold composition of this species, that's us, there are many differences between individuals belonging to it. So you can hardly find two individuals who are in any accord with respect to one of the species of moral habits, except in a way similar to that in which their visible forms may be in accord with one another. The cause of this is the difference of mixtures, owing to which the various kinds of matter differ, and accidents consequent to the form in question. What we're going to see about B'ezras Hashem starting next week as we get into Hilchot. Remember in the fourth parak of Yesodei Torah, third and fourth parak, where he talks about the four physical elements of the sublunar sphere, earth, air, fire, water, right? And he says, unlike everything else in the spheres, these are inert. They have no awareness. They don't know who or what they are. They don't know that there is a hierarchy, much less where they belong in the hierarchy. And every thing in the world, in the sublunar sphere, is composed of some kind of a blend of all four of them. So when we look at a piece of wood, we say, well, it's wood. We look at a clump of earth. We say earth, air, fire, water. Well, here's the earth. Where's the air and the fire and the water? Rambam says they're in there, but they're in there in such small proportion that the earth element is what predominates and what expresses itself. When we pick up a cup of water, we say, well, I see the water. Where's the earth, air, and fire? Rambam says they're all in there, but they're in there in a very small proportion, such that the water element predominates. The air and the fire are the same. So they're all, it's all there, it's all blended together. Earth, air, fire, water. In everything, okay? Similarly, we're going to see when we start talking about the characteristics of human beings, the qualities of human personality, it's not that some people are gentle and some people are violent and some people are kind and some people are nasty and some people are generous and some people are greedy. All of us have all of those qualities within us. And they exist in each individual in a different balance. And no two individuals are alike, no matter how close they are both genetically and in terms of their nurture. But we all have all of these. And they all also, at different times in our lives, some of them rise to the top and express themselves more strongly, and some retreat and cease to express themselves so strongly. And so that's how we go through what, sometimes we describe it as an emotional roller coaster, right? I can't believe it. Yesterday I felt so comfortable and I was so calm and so chill. Today, I'm a nervous wreck, right? I can't believe it. Last week you were so nice. Now you turned into such a nasty person. I can't believe it. Last time I came and I asked this guy for money, he couldn't give me enough. Now I come and he said, he slams the door in my face, right? So human beings are complex. And all of life is this kind of a wave. And if we expect consistency in anything, we're likely not just to be disappointed, but, I would say, going back to discussion of the guide of the difference or the partnership between the intellect and revelation, is that the intellect is a way of looking for and identifying these differences and these changes. And revelation of the halacha is a way of maintaining a baseline for ourselves. So that's our equilibrium. Right? When I say, like for myself, when I say, well, I can always fall back on the halacha, it's not like I'm too lazy to ask a question. It's, and the halacha can change also, right? As you said, sometimes the rug is pulled out from under us completely. But at the very least, when people said to me, well, you let other people tell you how to live your life, when I became religious, I said, well, no, it's not about that. But in terms of the halacha and in terms of, our whole way of life and our approach to thinking about life, Torah came into the world 3,500 years ago, right? Bezrat Hashem next week, we'll be celebrating Shavuot. I guess we won't have shir that day. And since that time, thousands and thousands of the most intelligent, the most intellectually honest, the most dedicated, the most spiritual people, and the most generous people in all of human history devote their entire lives to figuring out what it is that God was trying to tell us. So I got a lot to fall back on, and I got a lot to process and to learn before I can say that I want to accept this and reject that. All right? So if there's something I don't know yet, I have good support to fall back on in terms of whether it's the moral guidance that comes from the halacha, something as simple as like the notion of giving tzedakah every day, right? Well, we can all say without being religious that it's a good thing to give charity, right? And so there's laws of tzedakah. I say, yeah, and I remember I've had arguments with people, they say, I give a lot of tzedakah. Like I come into a shir and I put a quarter in the pushka, right? And then I'd say to the guy standing next to me, I give so much tzedakah. Okay, did you give today? No, I get, at the end of the year I got my bonus. You should see how big a check I write.
Tax deduction.
Okay, fine. But if you're not in training every day, then because you never know when it's game time, right? That's why you have to go and train every day. You have to go to the weight room every day. You got to do the wind sprints every day. You never know when you're all of a sudden going to be called on the field. So it's true. The halacha for me is a way of Bezrat Hashem of trying to, maintain a certain kind of an internal stability and a stability with respect to the way I interact with the world. While all this other crazy stuff is bubbling in my head, making me nuts, Amen, amen. Thank you very much. I wish you all Chag Sameach and a Chag Sameach. Today, Bezrat Hashem, we have the kind of the Simchas Torah of the secular Chagim of Medinat Yisrael. Yom HaShoah, Yom HaZikaron, Yom HaAtzmaut, and today Yom Yerushalayim. And Bezrat Hashem next week we'll have a Lichtik and Kabbalah Satira.